everybody, this is James from 40K Amateur Hour, and today we're going to show you how to paint the Lord of Skulls. Well, so I opened up the box of the Lord of Skulls when I got it, and I noticed that it has 6 different sprues that we need to work with. Deciding to paint and what not to paint, some of the stuff I left on the sprues we'll show you later, and some of it I took off and assembled. So I decided to take and cut away the main body and the track section of the Lord of Skulls, put it together with this plastic cement here, and file down the edges just like any good modeler will, and that's what I decided to paint first. And then I left the rest of the pieces like the tank, the weapons and things like that on the sprue to prime and to paint our red. Now I like to use plastic cement only on plastic only because it fuses and chemically melts the plastic pieces together. I'm not a big fan of super glue, only on metal to plastic. You know, sometimes the pieces don't quite fit exactly the way you want it, and that's when you got to pull out your file. I have 2 different kinds of files that I use. I have like a little emery board file, and then I have a metal file that I think I got from Games Workshop. So you just use the emery board file right here, take off the little chunks from the sprue that came off, and get rid of the mold lines, and just clean up the nice model nice and neat on all the pieces, and make sure it looks good, and it'll make you sure that your model's professional looking in the end. So I've glued the tracks together, even with the little separating spacers that I show here, and then I'm going to put the entire tracked body, the base, together. I started assembling everything that I could except for basically the tanks, the snowplow. I assembled the face, the head, the body, the spine, and everything, like I said, except for the Murderer's Blood tanks, and those I painted on the sprue. Next we're going to use Minotaur's Badger's paint, Raven Black, and I primed the entire model. At the time I was actually building the Lord of Skulls, Badger was just coming out with their new primer, their white and their black, so I need to get a hold of that and give it a try. But Raven Black or Snow White in the Badger Minotaur airbrush line does really well for me, and I haven't had any problems with it. As you can see, I left the boiling Murderer's Blood tanks that go on the back of the Lord of Skull. I left those and the little tiny little bits that go everywhere, the pipes and the organic tubes and things like that. And I actually left those on the sprue this time and painted them and primed them Raven Black, and then later primed them different colors you'll see. But this worked out well for me because there was a lot of tiny little bits for this model, surprisingly, and they were all over the place. So I left them on the sprue, primed them, and then only cut them out and clipped them out when I needed to. And very little of the model was not primed, and that was easy to touch up. Next, I coated the entire model with Minotaur's red, and it's called Innards, and it's a great dark red color. And besides, you can't have a Lord of Skull, a champion of Khorne, Blood for the Blood God, without having a color called Innards. And so I put that on my airbrush, and I coated the entire model with that. So I painted the entire model, like I was saying, with this Innard red. It worked out great. What I did not cover was any of the tracks or any place that was going to be silver or gray or any metallic parts. Those I left just standard black, and I went back over those later. As you can see, most of this model is going to be that red color. Again, you just got to cover everything. You just kind of take your time. The airbrush makes this super easy. You can do it by hand. It takes you a little bit longer, but I'm a big fan of the airbrush, and it made quick work out of all these bits and pieces of the Lord of Skulls. What I did next is something that I don't think anybody out there that I've seen do with the Lord of Skulls, and that's candy it up and do some ghost hints. And I'm a real big fan of these ghost hints, and so I tried it on this Lord of Skull. And what I have here is I found on Amazon.com, for example, a stencil of skulls or demon faces. And then what I did is I painted it with a light gray over the stencil, let it dry, and then I went over it with different colors, different ghost hints. Orange, the yellow seemed to work really well, and even the magenta we did. And I just painted faces all over in random bits and pieces on this Lord of Skull. And then later, as I'll show you, I washed it and really toned it down, so it looks like a camouflage almost, but as you look at it really closely on the table, it's actually screaming demon faces. Sorry about that little quick blurb of the color I used because I sped up the clip, because what I did. And what that is that's a Minotaur's Badger line of gun alloy. And it's one of the few times that I used it. I've had a hard time with the metallics with the Badger line and the airbrush, but for some reason I really mixed it up good for a long time. And I sprayed it on the Murderer's Blood tanks and all the valves and things like that. And it really worked out really well. I was really impressed. I haven't had much success with it later, but as you can see right here in this video, it turned out really good. It's not a normal silver or normal gray that you use, like for example from GW or Privateer Pest, as I'll use later, but this really worked out. So that was Minotaur's Badger Gunmetal Gray. Next, this model has a ton of little filigree and little gold pieces and nooks and crannies and ornament of skulls and things like that. And so I did the gold with that as a three-step process. What I used was Citadel's Auric Armor Gold and went over everything. And then what I did was I went over back and I used the Nolan wash, washed all the gold, and then I came back with Vallejo's Old Gold over top to highlight it, and it really made the gold kind of old and bronzy kind of a look, but not quite the bronze color, but still gold. Like I said before, this model is full of filigree to paint with gold, so get used to paying a lot of gold if you're going to do this model. Here's an example of all the gold that I had to do on it, and with the red and some airbrushed highlights on orange to show like power glow on some of the vents. And a little close-up up here. And then what I did was, like I said, I took the Nolan oil, washed all over the gold, and then I went highlighted over there with the Vallejo Old Gold color. I also took Privateer Press's Quicksilver and went over every single bolt and rivet that this model had and just lightly touched on it to give it that nice little silver appearance. I also used the Quicksilver to go over any kind of chains, metal parts that I thought would be exposed. I gave it a quick wash with Newland oil, then went back over it with a highlight of the same Quicksilver just to make it pop. Alright, so anywhere there was red, like I mentioned earlier in the video, I was going to tone down the whole model, including those camouflage screaming faces. I used Citadel Shade Carroburg Crimson, and I was very careful only to get on the red and over the highlight of the the orange glows, and it toned down the model, gave it a darker, richer red, but it also didn't make all those faces as obvious, and so that's what I wanted. I didn't want them just to stand out. I wanted people, when I played it on the table, I wanted people to look at it and go, hey, what is that? And those are little faces, and it really worked well. I then took Privateer Press Cold Steel and I actually dry brushed the inside of the tracks where all the mechanism and the gears are that move the tracks. Real simple process. You guys have probably seen this 100 videos. It's all I did. Bad brush, put some paint on it, wipe it off on a cloth just to get just enough paint on it, and just like the video shows, dry brush it right on there. It works quick and fast and easy. Okay, so for the gold on the snow plow or whatever the giant plow type thing is in front of the model, the gold is the same process. The GW Iric Armor Gold, Nolan Wash, and then Vallejo's Old Gold. For the skulls, I use just a normal white color, any white color that you want. Then I washed with Citadel Sarah Sepia Wash, and then after that was completely dry, I went over it with a Citadel Agrath Urk Shade wash. Once all the wash was dried, I highlighted with the same white color. If you're choosing white, doesn't really matter. I kind of toned it down just a little bit. It wasn't a pure white, it wasn't a snow white, it was 1 or 2 steps down. And then that's how I got all my skulls on the Lord of Skull model. The silvers I was showing there at the beginning of this clip was Privateer Press Quicksilver and Privateer Press Dull Gray. And when I did that, there's little gray bits on front of the plow, and that's what I was using to get those. So not everything is gold, not everything is skull colored, just those little bits right there. Next, I get to use Citadel's new technical line, and this was Blood for the Blood God. It's a blood simulator, and I used it on the plow, and I used it on the giant D weapon, the Axe of Corn. And what I did with this was I used different techniques. I just, obviously dabbed it in the brush and applied it. And then what I did was I flicked it on there, and you can use like a toothbrush I've seen, but what I like to do is you'll see is I take it and I dip it in there, and then I use my airbrush and just the air and blow the air off, or blow the paint rather, off the brush with the air, and it works good for blood splatter. And as mentioned before, here's the technique. I just use a fan brush, dipped it in the blood, the technical paint, and I use the air from the airbrush. No paint in the airbrush, just the air, and blow through the brush, and it works great for blood splatter. Now the fluff for this particular model says that the tanks are supposed to be filled with boiling murderous blood. And so I had a real hard time. I had to do them over a couple times. Was never happy with the way they turned out. But the process finally ended up with was painting a base coat of angelic red from Minotaur, the Badger paint line, as you can see here. And then what I did, and I didn't get it on video, but what I did is I washed it back over with that Caravan, or that Crimson wash from Citadel. Washed it, and I also painted a gray on the background to give it a different color, tank color, than the gunmetal gray. And that's important. You got to paint the back just a little bit different. And I've already done this before I showed you on the video. And then I kind of played with it. And then what I did was I took a little tiny little brush, as small as you can get it, with just with a dab of white, and just dabbed little tiny little dots all up and down the red. And that made it look like it was boiling. And it turned out really well, as you'll see in the finished product. But angelic blood seemed to be the best color due to the fact that we're using innards, the color that's based, which would normally be a good color for blood anyway. So you had to make the blood on the tank pop more than the blood on the body. Next, what I did is anything that was silver I washed over with Nolan oil, made a real heavy wash on the tanks, a light wash on the rest of the model, real heavy wash on the tanks, real heavy wash on the weapons, the Screaming Skull, the autocannon, or the Gatling gun, and that was because I wanted to make it look dingy and dirty. And then I went back over and highlighted it with a Privateer Press cold steel. It's not a bright silver, but it was just enough to make it pop and not dull it down with that wash. Next, this is completely optional to what you want, but I wanted to kind of do it. I liked it. Is I took Vallejo's Old Gold and I dabbed on it and just did a little bit of brush. Basically, what I did was dry brush all the little tiny little skull, or I'm sorry, the corn markings on the tracks. And all of the tracks have these tiny little corn markings, the symbol of corn, and I dry brushed them all over top of that. And it took a little bit of time. The clip sped up here, but in the end, I think it looked better, and it made the tracks look a little bit better, appeasing to the eye. Finally, I used another one of Citadel's technical paints. This was Typhus's Rot, and it's a brown paint, and it's got actual dirt pieces in it, and I just dabbed my old brush, my fan brush, an old crappy brush that I had, and just painted over the tracks and somewhere on the models where I thought some mud would be splashed up on it, and I just dry brushed it all over and just kind of splattered it all in there, and it gives that nice little added touch to the model, like it's been driving through the battlefield and crushing your enemies, and it's driven over not only blood and people's skulls and collecting skulls for the Skull Throne, but also like the muck and the mire of different planets and different worlds. And here you go. Here's the finished model already done and on the table. I've played a couple games with it so far. It's a great model. We'll have a review on it, a couple battle reports. If you like any close-up pictures or any other techniques that I've left out, there's a lot of things, little tiny little tidbits that I left off this video for your own creative interpretership. But anything I can help you with, go ahead and just comment below. And thanks again. Like, subscribe, and comment.